Highlander's Flower. Written by Barbara Bard and published by Starfall Publications. Subscribe for more audiobooks. Enjoy. Chapter 1. My child, this is a day I have long waited for, yet my heart is mixed with happiness and sorrow, Lord Charles Bramble said, his eyes tinged with wistful tears. Before him stood his daughter Rosemary, who looked demure in a white frock, with her brown tresses of hair cascading down past her shoulders. Smiling sweetly, she bowed her head in front of her father. He leaned in to kiss her on her cheek. His moustache tickled, and she tried not to shudder. I must admit I am feeling nerves myself, father. You shall be fine, my girl. This marriage will be a boon to this family, and we shall be strong going forward. Lord Harold is a fine man, and he will make a good husband, of that I am sure. I only wish that I had the chance to know him first, aside from the glimpse I have stolen upon his visits here. That is part of the fun. You will have the rest of your life to get to know him, and I know he is excited to meet you. I have assured him of your beauty. I believe the mystery appealed to him. Rosemary exhaled deeply and looked around at her room. Having just turned 18, her life had begun in earnest, although she did not feel that she had lived at all yet. Having just come into her own as a woman, she was already being ushered off to another man, Lord Harold Flynn. By all accounts, he was a fine man, and yet Rosemary found herself filled with hesitation rather than excitement. Indeed, her father showed more enthusiasm for the affair than she herself did. For his sake, she feigned anticipation and acted in the manner that her father would have wished. I just hate to leave you alone, she said, reaching out and clasping her father's hands. Even though they had been gnarled by age, his fingers were still smooth. I shall be fine. It is the natural order of things that a father should say goodbye to his daughter as she embarks on the greatest adventure known to man. I have the servants with me, and my friends. You know what I mean, father. You need the company of one who loves you. I so wish Mother were here, Rosemary said, gazing wistfully at the bed where she would lay as a child, nestled in her mother's lap. There her mother would read her stories, every night before she slept without fail. Her father squeezed her hands and smiled kindly. As do I, but we must make the most of the years we have been given. I know that she would be proud today. She would probably have some wise words to say as well. She always knew what to say. How did you feel when the two of you were to be married? Much the same as you feel now. I was trying my best to act stoic, but inside my stomach was churning. Your mother, I believe, was very anxious, and it was only when she took her first steps in this house that she was calmed. All those fears disappeared when our eyes met. She was the loveliest creature I had ever seen. Well, until you were born, that is. Every time I look at you, I am reminded of her. You are the spitting image of her, right down to your birthmark. Rosemary smiled as she looked down at her stomach and placed her hand just above her hip. I always remember she would show me hers when she bathed me. She said that we were linked, that it was proof we had a part of each other inside us. Exactly. I know that you have her strength, and that this is the beginning of the best days of your life. Lord Harold is a fortunate man, and I am sure that he will prove his love to you over and over again during your marriage. I hope you are right, Rosemary said. Charles smiled again and wrapped his strong arms around her in a fatherly embrace. Squeezing her tightly, Rosemary almost felt the breath driven from her lungs. Believe me, Rosemary, this day is more difficult for me than it is for you. Long have I dreaded the day where I would have to say goodbye to my only daughter, but this is what you have been destined for since the day you were born. I shall do my utmost to make you proud, she said, curtsying as she stepped back. Charles looked at his daughter and wiped a tear from his eye, declaring that he would leave her to make her final preparations. With that, he left the room, and Rosemary was alone. Now that her father was gone, she could let her mask slip. Falling onto the bed, she felt the soft mattress sink under her weight. Her hair fell over her face as she placed her head in her hands and tried not to weep. Rosemary was being forced to leave the only home she had ever known to marry a stranger. It was something that her father had tried his best to prepare her for. But now that the day had arrived, Rosemary's head was spinning. She hadn't been able to tell her father the truth, that she did not want to be married. It had been hard for her, knowing that she was different from the other girls growing up. Whenever they talked about their futures, they were all excited to be married to a lord or a duke, forming alliances through marriage that would lead their families to greater riches, and giving birth to sons and daughters they hoped would rise through the upper echelons of society and leave a formidable legacy. Rosemary had always had a grim feeling in her mind whenever these matters were spoken of. Rising from the bed, Rosemary moved to the window and peered outside. The sky was clear of clouds, and the golden sun beamed down upon the rolling green clouds. A road stretched from the house into a dark forest, and beyond that lay her future. When she was younger, she had often gazed out of this window and wondered about the world outside, wanting to know what adventures awaited her. Rosemary's mind had been inspired by the stories her mother told, of great warriors and quick-witted princess. She had been certain her destiny lay out there, not in the arms of some other lord. Rosemary wanted to be one of the heroes in the stories. She wanted to find her destiny by herself, not to be stuck in another room where she would forever be gazing out at the world. She wanted to be out in the world. When she had turned 14, Rosemary had tried to strike out on her own. She had filled a sack with some biscuits, bread and cheese, then strode out towards the forest. Rosemary barely got a few feet before she was pulled back, reaching out futilely, feeling as though she was being held back from her future. After this, her father had had a strong talk with her about her duty and how she was responsible for ensuring that the family endured. Never before had she seen her father so passionate about a matter, and it only made her feel more guilty for the feelings she held in her heart. She simply couldn't see how she could be happy being the wife of a lord and nothing more. Of course, after that talk, she could never reveal her true desires to her father, so she played the part of the dutiful daughter in the hope that, eventually, it would become the truth. It was not to be. And now she was still filled with that longing to be out in the world, riding through the trees with the wind at her back, ready to meet whatever challenge faced her. Rosemary turned from the window. It would do herself no good to focus on the life she could not have. It was a difficult truth to swallow, but it was the truth. By the door sat a wooden chest. It contained all her worldly possessions. It seemed strange to her that every aspect of her life could be held within a chest of that size. She thought she was more than that. Lifting the lid, she looked inside. Mostly there were garments folded neatly by her handmaid Sarah. Resting on top of them all was a golden locket. Rosemary took it in her hands. It was an oval shape and had a hefty weight to it. The gold chain flowed along her hand, deftly made. It was the work of a true craftsman. On the back of the locket, the house symbol was etched, a sword flanked by red roses. Rosemary ran her thumb across the coat of arms. Soon enough she would adopt another name, another house, but she would always be a Bramble. Inside the locket was a small painting of her mother and father when they were her age. It was strange to think of her parents as young people, with passions and hopes of their own. Would she have a daughter of her own one day, and give her a locket with a picture of herself and Harold inside? Would this daughter then be looking at the locket in much the same way as Rosemary was looking at hers? It seemed as though life was a cycle, repeating itself through the ages. No, Rosemary thought firmly. If she had a daughter, she would not be shackled to this wheel. Rosemary would make certain that her daughter would get to live the life she wanted. If that option was not open to Rosemary, then she would ensure that it was to her daughter. However, she then wondered ruefully if her own mother had had that same thought. Sometimes it seemed as though life worked of its own accord, and that she was simply swept up in its current. Pulling her hair out of the way, Rosemary fastened the locket around her neck. It rested against her chest, and she felt better for having it there. She was venturing into new lands and wanted to have a reminder of her family close to her heart. "It is almost time, my lady," the plain-looking handmaid Sarah said, stepping into the room. Rosemary nodded and sighed. It is strange to be leaving this home. I feel the same way, my lady. You and your father took me in so long ago that I have thought of this as my home, and I am just as upset as you. I am glad you are coming with me, though. It is as though I am taking a piece of home with me. At least we shall have each other to remind ourselves of the familiar. Indeed, Lady Rosemary, I am honoured that I have been chosen. There was no other choice to make. You have been with me since we were children. In truth, I think of you as more of a friend than a handmaiden, even a sister. Such words are music to my ears. I have always thought of you as the same. Ever since my parents were killed in the war, I have longed to feel part of a family again. I know it is not the same, but the way you and Lord Bramble have treated me is the closest I shall ever get. Until you have your own family, Rosemary reminded her. Sarah blushed and dipped her head. I do not know about that. One day you shall meet a fine blacksmith, a hardy man who will take care of you, and you shall raise some strapping children. Perhaps, my lady, but you will beat me to love. I suppose, but there is doubt in my mind. Is not Lord Flynn one of the most desirable men in England? Oh, indeed, especially from what Father says. By the way Father speaks about Lord Flynn, I often wonder if he would like to marry the young lord as well, Rosemary said. The girls tittered with laughter. You do not agree with his assessment? Sarah asked. I have no reason to fear my father would lead me astray, but there are times when I feel envious of you. Of me? Sarah said, astonished. Indeed. You will get to choose freely whichever man you wish to marry, be he a blacksmith or a baker. The choice is yours, whereas mine has been made for me. That is because my choice does not matter. Your children will be a part of a dynasty and may shape the future of England. Precisely my point, Sarah. Sometimes I feel as though my life is nothing more than a cog in an endlessly turning wheel. Rosemary sighed. It was clear that Sarah did not know what to say, and Rosemary didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. Go and tell my father that I shall be down shortly, she said. Sarah nodded and left Rosemary alone. Taking one last look around her childhood room, Rosemary dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. When she had been younger, this room had been the whole world to her, and now she was unlikely to ever see it again. A new house waited for her, with a room she would have to share with her new husband. The thought was almost enough to make her shudder, and she gripped the handle of the door to steady herself. There were so many unknowns lying in wait for her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that if she walked the path her father had laid out for her instead of her own, she would always regret it. It was impossible to think that way, though. It was selfish to think that way. She simply had to harden her heart and resolve herself to this fate. She was to be married to Lord Harold, to bear him children, and enjoy a prosperous life with him. When she met him, she hoped that these feelings would disappear, and that she would fall in love with him instantly, just as her mother had fallen in love with her father. Mother had always told her that there was one special man for everyone out in the world waiting for her, and that if they found each other, it would be the most wonderful feeling in the world. Was Lord Harold Flynn that dashing figure? She had to hope so, because if there was another man for her, she would be forever unhappy, as Lord Harold was the man she was going to marry, and there was nothing that was going to change that. Chapter 2. I've got you new, Blair thought to himself as he waited to pounce. Every sinew in his powerful body was primed to make the final leap forward and slay the beast before him. It had been a long hunt, lasting the better part of a day, and the sun would begin to dwindle soon. If Blair did not catch his prey before the sun set, he would have to return home empty-handed, for at night he would become the prey to the wild beasts that lurked in darkness of night. Blair's fingers curled around his spear as he watched the beast intently. It stood, unaware that it was being tracked. Its head was bowed as it grazed the floor, pulling up grass and flowers to eat. Blair's stomach rumbled as he thought about sinking his teeth into the juicy flesh, and he instantly cursed, hoping that his body would not betray him. The animal didn't notice, however. It was alone, vulnerable, and ripe to be slaughtered. Blair grinned as he savoured this moment, the moment when he knew that he was triumphant, when he knew that he was victorious, when he knew that he had won. The light would soon go out in the beast's eyes, and it was all down to Blair. He had earned this kill, and he would enjoy the plaudits given to him by the rest of the clan when he returned. Ye mine new, Blair thought to himself, ye hae been worthy prey, but like all the others ye will fall to my might. But how I wish ye were a warrior, ready to fight back instead of standing there helpless. This is the closest tay battle I can come, but it's nae close enough. The antlered beast stirred for a moment as a bird flew away, making the leaves shake. The area around him was cast in a green light as the thick, broad leaves shielded the forest from the sun. The sound of a scurrying animal greeted his ears, but he was not going to lose his focus. Raising the spear above his shoulder, Blair leaned back. His biceps glistened with sweat, and his thick shoulder-length hair brushed against his face. Blair steadied his breathing, inhaling through his nose, then exhaling through the mouth. Each breath was smooth and clear. His body was one with the spear. It was as though it was a part of him. He brought it back and summoned his formidable strength. His other arm stretched out before him, and each of his fingers pointed at the beast's heart. Blair felt the weight of the spear in his hand, and then, when he was ready, launched the weapon forward with all the strength he could muster. Bellowing in the heat of the primal moment, he flung his body forward, giving the spear as much momentum as was possible. The roar did alert the beast, who looked up from its snack, but it was too late. Just as it realized the danger it was in, the spear embedded itself deep in its chest. It yelped and sank to the floor, its legs writhing, its head twisting due to the pain. Blair leaped forward as the animal tried its best to scramble away, but it was helpless. "You were a noble foe," Blair said, having a lot of respect for the creature he had been tracking for hours. "But ye were unable to match my prowess. One day I shall find a foe worthy of me, and I shall slay him like a beast. One day I shall stand with my brothers in an army and fight the Sassenachs. I ken they're planning something waiting to strike. Such a vile enemy dinna engage in peace. They're waiting, lurking, and we cannae allow ourselves to be weak." The length of the hunt made the triumph all the sweeter, though, and he would savour the meat when it was cooked more than anyone. Grabbing a knife from around the small of his back, he quickly slit the animal's throat, putting it out of its misery. He sighed and looked down at the dead body. The milky, lifeless eyes stared into nothingness. The long, pointed antlers were still. Blood pulsed onto the ground. The stag had been majestic when it had been alive, but now it was just a carcass. "Sometimes I feel the same way," Blair said. "You're dead noo, but at least ye ha' lived. I ha' ne'er had the chance. The closest I get to warfare is by hunting animals. Ne'er hae I ken the thunderous feeling of fire and blood coursing through my veins. Maybe I ne'er will. My father was fortunate to live in the world when the war waged. How I would ha' loved to ha' tested my mettle against the Sassenach warriors. I was born into the wrong time, which is all the worst for ye, my friend. Instead of battling the Sassenachs, I am hunting your kind." Blood seeped from its neck and flowed to the ground, pooling around Blair's feet. He placed one foot on its still chest and gripped his spear, yanking it out. He then wiped it on the ground beside him, for it had been covered with the innards of the beast. Blair sheathed the spear across his back, and then collected the animal, straining as he did so. The beast was heavy, and for the first time that day Blair wished that he had company. Returning home was something that Blair knew he would have to do, but in truth he would have much rather stayed out in the forest. It had always been more of a home to him than anywhere else. He could be free out here, and not have to worry about any of his responsibilities as the eldest son of Laird of the McCall clan. Still, hauling the beast back to his home would be as great an effort as the hunt itself, but it would make the clan all the more impressed. With sweat pouring from his temples, Blair dragged the beast by its feet through the forest, leaving a trail of blood in its wake. There were occasions when Blair sensed the presence of other animals, but he knew that they would not attack. He was the master of this domain, and none of them would dare to challenge him. Still, it will be nice to be challenged once in a while. Is it such a sin for a man to want to prove himself against the best warriors? I ha half a mind to run across the border and fight the Sassenachs new. I wonder how many I would be able to kill before I was forced to flee. 10? 20? It has always surprised me how the Sassenachs managed to fight a war against us. We're the mightiest warriors. The Sassenachs are a cunning enemy, though, and they had the numerical advantage. I wish Father would let me venture into England and remind them that we're here. Soon they will forget, and we shall ne'er have the chance to prove ourselves in combat again. Smiling to himself as he continued forward, his feet brushed against fallen leaves and twigs snapped under his steps. The woods had always seemed somewhat mystical to him, mostly because his mother had told him stories from a young age. She had spoken of nymphs and fairies coming alive at night to enact chaos on anyone they snared in their grip. As he grew older, Blair realised that she had likely told him these stories in order to frighten him and make sure he stayed away from the forest when it was dark. The stories had had the opposite effect, though, and Blair had spent as much of his life as he could in among the trees and woods, hoping that one day he would see a nymph or a fairy for real. Until then, he would hunt, which is what he was best at. Unrivalled for strength and stature in his clan, Blair was a mighty warrior, and he often brought back food for the clan to eat. Most of them thought he was doing it out of a sense of duty, but for Blair, his purpose was entirely self-serving. The only way he could feel freedom was to be out in the world, feeling the wind at his back and breathing in the open air. In the forest with the animals he felt at peace, while at home he felt stifled. This was true freedom, he thought to himself as he made his way through the forest, but became more despondent as he grew nearer to home. His shoulders and back were aching after having dragged his prey, but he was not going to show any sign of weakness now. He had a reputation to maintain after all. "We wondered if you were ever going to return," his brother Drew said as Blair emerged from the forest. In the distance, on top of a hill, the family home stood. It was a small stone castle, its grey walls in contrasts with the vibrant green hill upon which it stood, and the blue sky that lay beyond. Blair should have felt relief at the sight of home, but instead he felt a deep sense of gloom. All the enjoyment of the hunt flowed out of his body, and he wished he could have stayed in the forest all night. "Did you really think a hunter like me would be killed?" Blair replied in his rumbling voice, leaving the deer for his brother, who picked up the slack. Blair's return was noticed by a few other clansmen, and he beckoned for them to give him aid. They rushed over and helped Drew carry the beast to the castle, where it would be skinned and prepared for the fire. "It has been kent to happen to others. All it takes is one mistake." "I dinna make mistakes," Blair growled. He quickened his pace and tried not to glower. "We shall be eating well tonight," he cried out. The sight of the stag was met with much rejoicing, and he was met with many statements of gratitude. Drew shook his head and sighed. "Father wants to see ye," he said. Blair's expression darkened. "I am sure it's nae something I should meet with excitement." "I imagine it's something the day with duty and honour." Blair snorted. "Those matters that weigh heavier than a mountain. Indeed, and once again, I am fortunate that you were born before me." "Oh, if only things were different," Blair said, slapping his brother around the back. Drew stumbled forward but took it in his stride. "And how are you going to meet your glory, Drew? In these times of peace, it's going to be difficult for warriors like us to find our place in history." "There will always be opportunities," Drew said. "We must just be patient and seize them when they arrive." "I would rather go oot and seize them myself," Blair said, looking down at the beast he slew. "A warrior must go oot and find their glory. It will nae arrive on a platter." "And how many animals do you think you had to kill before you claim your place in the afterlife?" The question was not said with malice, but Blair grunted as he strode towards the castle. "The blood I shed may nae be in war, but I am still proving mysel. We can only fight the foes in front of us no more," he said, and then increased his pace to walk away from Drew. Blair loved his younger brother, but sometimes Drew maddened him. The boy seemed to think that everything would come to him if he just waited. Blair was well aware life was not like that in the slightest. Glory was something you had to go out into the world and seize with your own two hands, wrest it from the gods and claim as your own. Yes, the beasts he slaughtered were not as impressive as slaying vicious enemies, but the more blood he shed, the more he was prepared when that day of glory did come. Blair was not content to sit in his castle and get fat. He was a lean man, his body packed with taut muscles, as though he was carved from marble. As he stalked through the camp that lay outside the castle, women gazed admiringly at him, although none of them approached him yet. One day he would make a wife out of one of them. At least that's what his father wanted. His father wanted so many things for him, though. Sometimes it felt to Blair as though he wasn't living his own life at all, but the life his father wanted for him. Blair stalked like a wild animal into the castle, feeling the air cool as he stepped into the stone walls. The people of the castle bowed and curtsied to him as he passed, but he gave them nary a glance. As he walked into the main chamber, his fists clenched, and he gritted his teeth. "Ah, my son," Ife said, sitting on his wooden throne. Blair walked up to him and sank to his knee out of respect. The room had one long table that was used for feasts, and a fireplace at the end. There was nothing but ash in it now. It was mainly used in winter, when the air was cold and breath turned to mist. The skin of a bear rested on the floor, its mouth gaping open. It was upon this that Blair stood. "You wish to see me feyther," Blair said. The seat beside Afe was empty. His mother was evidently on an errand. Afe leaned forward. Unlike Blair, who was clad in a loose shirt with a cloth draped around his hips, Afe was wearing a heavy dark cloak, which contrasted with his long white hair and bushy eyebrows. Beady blue eyes peered at Blair from behind this eyebrows, and when Afe spoke, his words tumbled out in a quick stream. "I see ye hae been oot hunting again. Another successful day, I see." "Aye, feyther." "How long do ye expect to keep up this behaviour, Blair?" "I dinna ken which ye mean, feyther," Blair said, still on one knee. "You run aboot that forest just as ye did when you were a bairn. I had hoped you would have grown up by noo. There are mair important things for ye to concern yourself with, Blair, and ye should be turning your eyes towards them." Blair knew exactly what Afe meant. It was not the first time they had had a conversation like this. "I go oot hunting for the clan. I bring back food for everyone to eat. I always have the well-being of the clan on my mind. Ye may well tell yourself that maybe ye even believe it, but I ken it's nae true. You run through that forest wi' oot a care in the world, for ye like to imagine you're free. You're the eldest son of a laird. Ye ha' ne'er been free," I've said. The words stung Blair. "I ha' indulged ye for long enough, Blair. Ye cannae shirk your responsibilities any longer. I am getting older every day," I've said, the words wheezing out of him. Blair looked up and saw his father not as the chief of the clan, but as an elderly man. "Ye speak foolishly, feyther. You're still in your prime. You're the man who faced down 100 Englishmen with your small force and drove them away. Your deeds in battle are legendary. They still sing songs of ye. Ye still hae a lot of life in ye yet," Blair said. "That man ye speak of has long since passed. He can stay in the songs. We must face the truth of matters, Blair. Ye claim you're brave, yet ye hide from this one inexorable truth." "No, feyther, I dae hide. I simply dae believe it. There is much life left in ye. Ye should nae give up. Ye were famed for your determination. Ne'er did ye believe in defeat. It was your spirit that helped us drive the English away. I dinna ken how much longer I can go on. This clan, it needs a strong leader to carry the burden of duty. I ha' done my best to raise ye and forge ye into that leader, but I fear I have failed somewhere along the way. I dae ken why ye choose to turn away from me so often, but I must implore ye to be mindful of your duty as my son. All ye ever talk about is duty, father. I dinna turn away from ye. I turn towards my life. I cannae be content to sit by and wait for the world to come to me. I cannae sit in this throne day by day. At least ye ha glorious memories to entertain ye. I ha nothing but unfilled dreams. Ye punish me for nae having had the opportunity to live as a warrior. Am I nae allowed to live my life as I choose? Nah, I've said. The answer took Blair by surprise. Lesser men can be free. Great men are tied by honour. You're nae the first to struggle with this, nor will ye be the last. But I need to make an effort to make ye see that ye cannae spend your days running through the forest. Your people need ye. The clan is safe, Father. There are nae enemies to fight. The English hae nae attacked for years. There is nae need for me to do all ye ask. I shall lead when I am needed, but until then, I am due a life of my own. And wit of your future, I've replied calmly. Hae ye spent any time thinking about the woman you wish to marry? There are many fine girls in this clan, or I can reach out to the other clans should ye wish. I will meet my future when I am ready, Father, and nae a moment before. We are often nae ready, Blair. Things happen that we cannae control. Ye must prepare yourself. I am preparing myself, Father. Instead of sitting in that chair, I am out there hunting, doing something useful for this clan. I will do all ye ask, but in my own time, and I shall nae be rushed, Blair said defiantly, rising to his feet once again. I have spent all day hunting. I am going to bathe in the stream before the feast tonight. I wish sometimes that ye would simply let me be and trust that I have my life well in hand. And I wish ye could see that the world is bigger than just your life, I've said, sighing heavily. Blair stormed out of the room, wishing that his father did not have such an effect on him. It seemed as though they were locked in this fight. His father wanted him to go one way, while Blair wanted to go another, and there seemed to be no resolution until one of them broke. Chapter 3. Charles offered Rosemary a hand into the carriage. The black carriage was being driven by 2 horses. Her chest was placed in the rear, along with some food for the journey. Sarah, Rosemary's handmaiden, was already in the carriage. It shouldn't be too long of a journey, Rosemary, Charles said reassuringly, and Harold is expecting you. The road is straight and there should be no delays. I am sure everything will be fine, Father. You do not have anything to worry about. I know, but you cannot blame a father for fretting. You are the most precious thing to me, he said, still having hold of her hand. Rosemary looked down at him and was filled with love as she gazed into his eyes. She could see the red rivers that stretched across the whites of his eyes, glistening with tears. Her father had never been a man to show much emotion, but she assumed that he would weep once she left. I feel guilty for leaving you in this big house alone. You should have company other than servants. I shall be fine, Rosemary. It is time for you to go and live your life. Have the adventure that you always wanted. Make me proud, and I look forward to seeing you again soon once you are married. I look forward to seeing you too, Father. I love you, and I shall miss you terribly. I love you too. Remember, your mother is watching down on you. I can never forget, Rosemary said. She leaned out of the carriage to give her father one last kiss on the cheek, and then she settled into her seat. She heard the coachman shout, "Hya!" The horses pulled away at a canter. Rosemary locked herself to the window for as long as she could as she watched her old life recede into the distance. The manor house in which she had spent all of her 18 years loomed behind her father, who looked smaller and smaller as she was driven away. Charles waved to her and blew her kisses. Rosemary waved back, long after it was possible for him to see. Soon all she could see were the ivy-covered walls. Rosemary looked up to her room. In a sense, it was as though her younger self was still gazing out of that window, looking out at the vast world around her, watching her present self disappear into the wider world. It wasn't how she had always dreamed of leaving, though, and in fact her stomach swam with nerves. The carriage trundled along, jerking slightly as the wheels caught on stones and pebbles strewn across the road. Eventually, Rosemary had to pull herself away from the window and prevent herself from looking at the life she was leaving behind. It would do no good to think about the way she wanted things to be. Some things merely had to be endured. This was her life, and the only question was whether she was going to meet it with dignity or not. Fondling the locket against her breast, she thought about how her mother and father had conducted themselves, and knew that she was going to make them proud no matter what. Above the carriage, in the sky, a bird flew. Rosemary couldn't help but look at the bird with envy. Its black wings were like slashes against the blue sky, and it soared free. Unlike Rosemary, it could go anywhere it wanted and do anything it wanted to do. Often she had gazed at birds and wished that she could fly through the air, off to new lands. As she thought this, the carriage entered the woodland, and it was plunged in shadow, sheltered from the heat of the sun. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked. Sarah, like Rosemary, was a demure girl, although a little plainer looking than Rosemary was. Sarah was of a similar age, and the two of them had known each other for so long that they were more akin to sisters than anything else. Sarah was a shy girl, never one to speak out of turn or to offend. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, smiling weakly at Rosemary. Rosemary was glad of her company on this journey, and was the only person with whom she felt she could share the truth. "Honestly, I am reluctant. I always knew that this was the likely course of my life, but now it is happening, I find myself wishing that I had more time." "Time to do what?" "To explore the world, to have an adventure. I feel as though my life has been written out for me, and I am merely turning the pages." "I am sure it will not turn out to be as dull as you think. Marriage comes with its own excitements," Sarah said, blushing. Rosemary chuckled softly. "Perhaps you are right. And Lord Harold is said to be an impressive man. It is an honour to be chosen for his wife." "I am sure it is, but I can't help but feel that I want to be known as more than his wife." "What more is there?" "There is a whole world out there, Sarah," Rosemary said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "A world filled with dangers. Do not forget about the threat across the border. There has not been even the slightest hint of a skirmish with those brutes," Rosemary said, "but it would be interesting to meet one. Do you think the rumours that they eat their own kind to be true? That they file their teeth to a point, and that some of them even turn into animals?" I do not wish to think about it," Sarah said, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Rosemary immediately regretted her zeal. "I apologise, Sarah. I did not mean to bring up those painful memories." "You are forgiven. One of these days I shall have to learn to be less sensitive. The attack was a long time ago, and there is nothing I can do to stop it. I do dread even thinking about coming face to face with one of those monsters, however. I do not imagine I would even be able to stand. You are stronger than you think, and you do not have anything to apologise for. Unlike you, I do not have anyone to blame for my mother's death, so I cannot imagine what it is like for you to know that they are out there beyond the border waiting. Do you ever think that they will attack again?" "My father did not think so. He said that we bloodied their noses the last time, and if they have the sense, they'll stay to their land and not bother with ours. Of course, they aren't no for their brains, so you never know. In that case, I am glad Lord Harold has quite the force at his command. Living so close to the border must take its toll on the nerves. I hardly think we will be sitting on the border, Sarah. Once we are in the manor, it will be just like our lives have always been, except instead of answering to my father, I shall have to answer to Lord Harold. Then I hope we reach the estate as quickly as possible. I have heard all sorts of stories about what lies in the woods. My mother told me the same stories, and they are all just silly imaginings made to send little children to sleep. There are more things to be afraid of out there, like the feeling that one's life is not in one's control. I would have thought you were beyond such fears now, Rosemary. There is no other way you can live life. That is not entirely true. I have often wondered what would happen if I ran away and fended for myself. With all due respect, I do not think you would last long. You have not exactly had much experience of being self-sufficient." Rosemary arched an eyebrow. Sarah was only ever this candid with her, and even then she was not usually so insulting, but Rosemary put it down to the girl's nerves and fragile spirit. Sarah had not had an easy life at all. Her parents were killed in a Scottish raid when she was younger, and Rosemary's father had taken Sarah into their care, giving her food and shelter in return for Sarah being Rosemary's handmaid. Sarah had always been haunted by the death of her parents, and had never been able to escape that tragic memory from her youth. For her, life was always viewed through a lens of fear, and the worst fate she could imagine was to be at the mercy of those who had killed her parents. However, Rosemary found the idea exciting. Not that she would reveal such to Sarah, of course, but secretly the thought of being lost beyond the border gave Rosemary a thrill to which nothing could compare. Never before had she met a Scot. She had only heard stories, but the tales of the brutish barbarians elicited a swift beating of the heart. It was a world entirely unlike the one she had known, and for just one moment in her life she would have liked to experience something outside of her usual sphere. "I believe I would fare much better than anyone would give me credit for," Rosemary said haughtily. "Just because I am a lady, it does not mean that I cannot take care of myself, and all I'm saying is that I would like the opportunity to explore that side of me." "I pray that you do not get the chance. What do you think Lord Harold is going to be like?" she asked. Rosemary felt the attempt to change the subject was weak, but accepted it. The carriage continued to roll along, jerking this way and that as the road apparently did not get any smoother. Outside, long branches of trees reached down to brush against the carriage. The clapping sound often made Sarah jump. Rosemary felt for the coachman, who did not have the shelter of the carriage to protect him from the lashing branches. "My father has a high opinion of him, and that is what matters. Apparently he is educated, well-bred, and is the sort of man that can live on the border without being afraid. He is a hardy sort, and one that I would be proud of marrying, if all that is accurate." Why would it not be? In my experience, albeit limited, men have a tendency to inflate the impressions they give each other. I do not think my father would marry me to someone unworthy, but I am not foolish enough to think that Harold will be exactly like my father describes. I merely hope that he is a decent sort and will treat me with kindness. "He is an English lord. I am sure that that behaviour is natural for him," Sarah said, shocked that Rosemary could think otherwise. Rosemary afforded herself a small smile. She was not in any way worldly, but when compared with Sarah, she had a wider outlook on the world. Her heart was filled with trepidation about Harold, for she worried that he would not be the gentleman her father thought. When her darkest fears took hold, she felt as though she was being led into a trap, and the woods around her were tempting an escape.
Thank you for watching. Before we continue into the story, do us a favor. Hit the subscribe button. This way we will be able to create more audiobooks for free for you. Thank you again. Now, back to our story.
Chapter 4. Blair stood in the stream. The water came up to his waist, lapping against his sculpted abdominal muscles. He reached down with his wide hands and scooped up some of the crystal water, throwing it over his face. The cool water fell down his body, trickling over his muscles, before it fell into the water again. It was hard enough for Blair not to thrash in the water after speaking with his father. The old man always expected so much of him, and Blair wanted something else. When he was younger, Blair had always seen himself as a mighty warrior, wanting to go out and fight the English, but the wars had ended, and his generation had little glory to find. His father spoke of leadership, but what was there to lead? These humble people who lived off the land. It was a story hardly worthy of song. At some point Blair knew that he would have to claim leadership from his father and take his seat at the throne, but as far as Blair was concerned, he wanted to leave it as long as possible. He dipped down into the water and washed off all the remnants of the hunt. When he emerged again, he shook his head, and the water sprayed off his hair. "I see you were successful at the hunt yet again," Deirdre said. Her slender body leaned against a tree. Red hair flowed down to the middle of her back, covering her chest, and her green eyes gleamed as they lingered on Blair's impressive body. Blair glanced towards her, then continued bathing himself. "There are few beasts that can challenge me," he said without any hint of arrogance, for it was just a simple fact. "Maybe nae beasts, but there are some challenges ye hae yet to face," she said, smiling wickedly. "I noticed you storming out of the castle. Are you always going to keep your eyes on me?" Deirdre shrugged and pulled a flower up from the ground, idly picking its petals away. "Until I find something else wi' which to occupy my time. I assume ye had another discussion wi' your faither." "That man is as stubborn as the day is long. I can ne'er get him to see my point of view. I'm sure he feels the same way about ye. Be careful of your words, Deirdre. Ye may think ye hae a special place wi' me, but we were childhood friends, na mair." At this, Deirdre threw the flower onto the floor. Her expression darkened as she stared at Blair with daggers in her eyes. "Na mair, we shared our first intimacy. That kiss sealed our love and ye had done nothing to even acknowledge it. It's as though it didn't even happen for ye." "Of course it happened, Deirdre, but it was mere child's play. Ye canna expect me to offer ye anything mair than that." "I can, and I dae," Deirdre said simply. "While ye ha' been off running around the forest, I was talking with your mither and faither. They both agree that the best thing for ye is to settle down and think about the future. You're no longer a youth and canna act so recklessly." "I can act as I please." "Nah, ye canna. Ye seem to think that because you're Aif's son, ye hae the freedom today as ye wish. Nothing could be further from the truth. You're tied to this clan, and it will one day be your duty to lead it. I believe your faither wants to hand over leadership to ye noo, but he is afraid that you're nae ready. Can ye nae take pity on the old man? Do ye nae see how frail he is? How weak? If there was any danger, he would nae be able to face it himself. The clan needs the blood of the young tae prosper. It needs our blood, and the blood of our children. I dinna ken why you're so intent on turning your back on our future," she spat. Blair looked at her, and wished that he was no in so vulnerable a position. He snarled, and then moved through the water, walking out. The water dripped off his naked body as he reached for his clothes and covered his exposed flesh. Deirdre's eyes dropped down to take in every inch of his masculinity, but it only stalled her for a few moments. "Dae nae speak of my faither in that manner. He is a great man. And great men dinna die. Great men gain immortality through the deeds and their glory. My faither's memory will endure long after he has passed from this world, but his day will nae come for a long time. He merely looks old because he continues to sit in that chair rather than riding out into the world. If the English came riding over the moors, my faither would be the first to leap up and ride out to meet them with his blade." Deirdre looked at him with pity. "Blair, I dinna want to fight wi' ye. I am only trying to make ye see what is best for the clan. Ye hae ken all your life that you're to be the leader after your faither. Why are you so intent on fighting it noo?" "When ye can work that out, I might think about marrying you," Blair said, pushing past her and away. Deirdre stood in shock, but she did not pursue him. The day was beginning to die, the sun relinquishing the celestial throne to the moon. The sky burned orange, and Blair returned to the camp, where people were making preparations for the feast. The beast he slew earlier had been skinned and was now roasting over a large fire. The smell of sizzling meat made his stomach rumbly, and he was looking forward to tearing off the meat with his teeth. Still, it was difficult to look forward to anything when he had both his father and Deirdre hounding him about the man he should be. Looking around, he felt different from these people. He was supposed to be the one to lead them, but all he wanted to do was escape from his duty. They were all so happy and seemed content with their lives, but Blair was always looking to the horizon, looking to see what else was out there. Alone, he kept to the edge of the camp and sat on a log, brooding. His back was to the castle. People knew him well enough by now to avoid him and his short temper, but he could hear their jovial shouts and their laughter. They were happy, and they shouted loud thanks to him for providing the meat for their feast, yet it was not enough for him. This place, It didn't feel like home. It always felt like there should be something more, and yet he was unable to understand where that feeling came from. A lot of his frustration came from these confusing feelings, and he wished he could be more certain of himself. "I brought you this, before there's none left," Drew said, handing him a thick steak. Blair took it in his hands and bit into it. The meat was succulent and tender. He ripped a chunk off with his teeth and chewed happily, closing his eyes with satisfaction. "You chose a fine animal," Drew said, "because I hunted it all day. In my experience, the longer the hunt, the more satisfying the meal." "Is that true with women, Tay?" The smile instantly fell from Blair's face. "Deirdre spoke with ye?" "Nay, directly. I was passing as she marched back from the stream and muttered about someone being impossible. By the way she spoke, I knew that she could only mean ye. That woman is nae happy unless she has something to moan about. She does hear a point, though. How long are you going to wait? For whit? Does everyone seek to control my life? Can I nae enjoy some moments of peace?" "Of course you can. But, brother, there is a reason why all of us are talking to ye about this." "And whit is that?" "Feyther is ill." Blair remained silent. "I ken that ye dinna want to face it," Drew continued, "but ye must. The clan needs you to be strong. Feyther canna continue indefinitely. At some point his strength will slip away from him and... Nah, Feyther is strong. He endured the war, he can endure this. I will nae entertain thoughts of him dying. He will live for many years yet. You're all merely fussing over him. Just because he is old doesn't mean that death is coming for him." "Blair, I ken how ye feel. Believe me, I dinna want to think about it any more than ye, but what you're doing isn't healthy. You canna keep running off every day. One day you're going to come back and..." "Dinna say it." Drew didn't have to. Blair knew what he was going to say. In truth, it had been on his mind for a long time, far longer than he cared to admit. Often his father could be heard in the night, coughing violently. He was old and frail, far from the mighty warrior he had been in his youth. "There is always one hunter greater than ye, one hunter that ne'er misses his mark," Drew said. "I am aware that Feyther will die, but that doesn't mean I have to accept it." "It means exactly that. We have lived in peace for years now, and these people deserve to ken that they're going to be cared for, that the clan will endure even after our Feyther passes away. There are many things ye can run from, Blair, but this is nae one of them. I am coming to ye because you're my brother. We have always been able to share our thoughts with one another, but this path you're on, it threatens us all." Blair chewed on the meat, finding it difficult to enjoy it any longer. He wiped some juice from his mouth. "Do you remember when we were young and used to dream about what lay beyond the border?" he said. "Of course. How could I forget? We were going to be warriors when we were of age and join the fight against the cowardly English. Those days ne'er came. The war ended before we were old enough. I was always frustrated that we ne'er got to test ourselves against the English. Ye ken, I heard Patrick and some of his boys had a skirmish with some English folk nae tae long ago. They clashed steel and came back alive, but Patrick said it had been a tough fight. We would have made short work of them, Drew. It often seems to me that war was a simpler time. Things made more sense. Warriors fought. A leader could lead his clan on the battlefield and fight for a worthy cause. What is a leader tae they knew? These people ken how to harvest crops, how to manage the fields. Whitmare is there. Tae inspire them. Tae let them ken that someone will be there if danger falls upon us. Your problem is that ye have always looked to the past or the future. Maybe ye should look at the present for a change, Drew said. Ye hae always been the wiser of the two of us, Blair said. Maybe it was unfortunate that ye were born after me. Ne'er say that, Blair. The gods will as they will. Ye were born first because ye hae a role to play that is greater than I. I day myself na dishonour by admitting that you're the strongest of us, but that doesn't mean you're flawless. I ken why you're behaving like this. Day ye. I am your brother Blair. I ken ye better than ye ken yourself. You're afraid of Feyther dying. There isn't a shame in that, but you're nae helping matters by running amok in the woods. "Ye should be learning from Father. He has much wisdom to impart to ye, and ye should listen to him, before it's too late." With that he took his leave. Blair looked at the meat in his hand and continued chewing, although he went through the motions without really enjoying the rewards of his labours. The sun had set completely now, and a blanket of stars hung in the sky, accompanied by a full moon. Behind him, a large bonfire crackled and glowed, its warmth spreading through the camp. Blair refused to look at the small castle, not wanting to think about his father sitting on that wooden throne, having his meat torn apart so it was easier for him to manage. He preferred to gaze out towards the border, thinking of the glory days of the past, when he was young and watched his father ride out, wielding his great axe. It had been an impressive sight to see all those warriors swarm across the rolling Highlands to crush the English, and had filled Blair's mind with hopes for his own future. The promise of war had never been fulfilled for him, though. He had spent all his life planning and training for it, but relations between the Scottish clans and the English lords had remained cordial, with the exception of a few skirmishes here and there. Blair had been prepared to lead his clan during war and to accept that his father died in battle, but he was not prepared to watch his father die slowly, as old age gradually pulled him into the dark abyss from which there was no return. With this on his mind, Blair tore the meat away from the bone and then threw the bone on the floor. Despite what everyone said, he was not going to be bullied into living a life he didn't want. But that begged the question, what life did he want? What was a man bred for war to do when there was no war? The only thing he could think to do was hunt, so in the darkness he moved away from the safety of home, wanting to feel the fire in his blood again, the simplicity of tracking prey, hoping that he would find a foe worthy of him.
Scan the QR code or click on the link in the description to read the full book. The full audiobook will be available on YouTube in a few days. What did you like the most? Comment below and share this video on your social media and with your friends. Watch one of the following videos. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell to not miss any new audiobooks. Thank you for watching.